Well, anyways, I don't know what time it is. It's probably around 3 a.m. in the morning right now. But anyway, I thought I'd get up because um, all I'm thinking about is, I mentioned previously about certain information normally, very rarely, this like Secret Service or there was a television series for a while, like about Secret Service in Washington, D.C. about it. But anyway, there have been periods of time when information is leaked to like national security and telepathic communication, and very rarely do they put it all on the same time about the telekinetic role of the pen. And obviously, it's really about Abraham Lincoln night vision and the Chevrolet Corvette. And obviously, it gets to the kernel of HTTP colon double forward slash about the Lincoln, the kennel, and the kernel. And what that is, the HTTP colon double forward slash and programming, alphanumeric linguistics, and all that. But anyway, yeah. So like it ultimately gets to the Corvette, okay, and In God We Trust, and all that stuff about the RCA mascot, okay, and the phonograph, and ultimately all the analytical and um, thing about algebra finding the unknown being like 112 in Houston. I mean, as far as like alphanumerics goes, Houston being 112 and unknown, the word being, predominantly, what algebra is all about is finding the unknown. I mean, it's taught as the main theme in the entire thought of like algebra is finding the unknown, okay? And you've heard it before, something about the unknown soldier, okay? And how true that is, okay? And the thing with this is that it seems like that something about that and a memorial in a way of the San Jacinto Monument, or like the thought of like isometrics, a grade beyond a normal daily standard transaction in the bank of representative, even the resurrection. It's beyond the monogamous eggnog crusade and the Easter basket of all the pastel colors and the resurrection and the Easter thing about it, right? So anyway, yeah. So like I was thinking about that because like a national security sometimes provides information linked somewhere in between national security and Secret Service, and never not once do they ever mention in chronological order at the same time. But I've only seen it like on television during the same period on different channels, not even on the same channel, but pretty much in the same area of like what programming means in the Houston, Texas area, at least on K television anyway. And how true it is about like networking involving local area networks, wide area networks, and World Wide Web. Actually, part of HTTP colon double forward slash likewise in addition. That way is that would give the dimensional clause, the Washington D.C. thing, Washington being 130 or television or electronic god, and the combination of what programming is that way. Excuse me. In any case, so like I got to the part about realizing that the telekinetics and it normally showing the role of the pen of some thought of like a telepathic power, and it's normally the pen rolling on a table, but does it even suggest like telepathic communication? The word is telekinetic, and the thing about Abraham Lincoln and the mascot of RCA and what the Delta Force is in communications of a persuasive technique, or what the hood ornament is to like Lincoln Continental in that rectangle. It seems to be like the deal about the global positioning systems and like one type, why one type of pronoun of the four types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject. And, a little bit of humor about the mascot of RCA and the phonograph. Yet, I don't know if I would anything other than the thought of like Chevrolet Corvette or the veterinarian, and it ultimately gets to like the alphanumerics of 213 or Chevrolet Silverado Z71, and the alphanumerics of 213 telepathic brainwaves, or like the area code of like the Los Angeles area, and all the alphanumerics of Los Angeles being 109, and like even like YouTube and governor and governor's president, and ultimately getting to the thought of like what a bicentennial quarter is to the Secretary of Treasury, Robert E. Rubin, and getting to the alphanumerics of 247 degrees, which seems to be the actual degree of like the Southwest thing about even Southwestern Bell, what was then Southwestern Bell, now AT&T, and the color code of like even the, the Air Force One thing, the President of the United States, the same colors that are actually on a 1040 EZ, normally not giving the impression of an IRA on the actual 1040 EZ, although I have seen it, but not every single time is the thing about it. And it seemed to be like ultimately gets to like whether or not if the IRA represents something in similarity of like non-taxable income in a way, whether it's prepaid as taxed, um, is the thing about it. And what the similarity is of like non-taxable income of like SSI, supplemental security income, and even like my thought of maybe a Mercedes or what even a patent, a U.S. patent, copyright and trademark is to like a writ of habeas corpus that would present maybe why litigation is not necessarily de facto, or the thought of what even a presidential debate would only mean based upon if the thought is only like a strategic issue, like an endorsement. I mean, if it ultimately gets to whether or not if a direct deposit is always the thought of the possibility that may or may not even be identified associated with a checking account, it's really the deal about what the similarity of a isometric is to just like a flat plane surface of a signature. Whether or not it's a block bold print thing about like blueprints that would normally be the demanded standard of block print instead of like and I don't even like calling it the way it's been taught as far as like a personal handwritten anything other than block print. But normally I mean that's like the demanded requirement of like blueprints, normally even schematics involving isometrics. And my thought of what a dimensional clause is to a third person beyond the thought of maybe an easement of international law dictating, what an intellectual easement is as far as being used as royalties, or human capital in a way designating whether or not if participation is only an option that would be considered whether it's, a daily standard transaction at a bank, of whether an endorsement is a registered charity or a certificate of deposit, or who's having a problem like staying alive just because of television programming on K television and K radio, or what all that PG-13 rating is with W television, W radio. In any case, so like it ultimately gets to like what I'm really referring to. In God we trust. Okay, it's like alphanumeric 175, like a telepathic Air Force. Okay, and like the Pearland High School thing. Okay, the thing with it is that I'm not going to go beyond that point right now because of the alphanumeric 175 or telepathic Air Force and how all that like with Highway 288 seems to be the thing about the whether or not if the alphanumerics of um, the algebraic test of inversion is does or does not equal. Does the results equal the answer? Is predominantly the thing about the algebraic test of inversion in that way. Either it equals each other or it doesn't. And it's normally, it's referred to as a test of algebraic. I mean, if that's like an algebraic test, or the test of the emergency broadcast system, can you believe it? In any case, so all that telepathic stuff about the intelligence and option or Pentagon reserve reverse, or some factors of alphanumerics that are linked to like the alphanumerics of 92, or the Pentagon, or anything beyond the Pentagon and calculus and involving like quantum. It seems to be the ultimate deal of whether or not if the ratio being practical application, or enforced in the way of like beyond pi r squared of exponents of simple addition, very rarely of subtraction, amazingly true, yet of exponential quotients, it's like beyond the executive classroom of degrees and powers of multiplication of and placement of like exponents and the degree itself, like even the longitude latitude thing about the little placement of the little degree thing, and ultimately ultimately some similarities of like terminology of the bubble that's in international financial management daily standard transaction involving the 12 Federal Reserve Banks and the New York Stock Exchange, and at huge, large, phenomenal scales in that way, or what the Federal Open Market window is to the discount window in the way of like a normal involving, international monetary funds and aggregates in a way that represent international importing and exporting at the same time, and reading some certain information. It's only on an analytical basis of the similarities of like all three of the things about the monetary domestic gross national product of aggregates seemingly kind of gives the impression analytically of in coordination with each other of importing and exporting that way. Likewise, in addition, transactions at that level of the New York Stock Exchange, sometimes it's not normally even referred to as inside trading, or the thought of inside trading is terms used at the New York Stock Exchange. It's like frowned upon, or some kind of idea of like that they're suggesting that there's a breach of international banking systems, when in fact maybe at a non-degreed level, maybe a breach of any kind, suggesting anything of the bubble in a way. That seemed to be, the thing about the terminology, that seemed to be like the trend. And, sometimes the terminology used in the inside trading information normally would suggest maybe something that would be questionable, representing normally of investment firms and transaction at a worldwide international level, like importing and exporting. And what a plain horizon is compared to a pie chart is. I mean, it's like the difference between business and corporate law on scale at a worldwide level of international importing and exporting. Because the plain horizon is predominantly, the worldwide thing about importing and exporting, not necessarily business law. I mean, really at all. And normally business law uses a pie chart to represent percentages as compared to a plain horizon, normally representative of a nation's predominant sources, and whether or not if income is really even the word, it would only be maybe a thought of maybe um, publication, maybe, or the actual thing about, well, I guess you had to be there, or like not, or what available only information means to linguistics and geographic attachment, depending upon the distribution of the information. But in case, or some like idea of like economic bracket or level where whether it's a degreed or non-degreed distribution, or level of local area networks or wide area networks or World Wide Web, and that way of even distribution of what access only means to available, and availability is as a preference, if not demanded standard, that would actually show that participation is or is not the real factor about being involved or not. But anyway, yeah, so like back to the telekinetic role of the pen, because it seems to be like really in alphanumeric linguistics, it has really ultimately gotten to, and I've mentioned it before, probably 2 or 3 years ago, if not a little bit before, that the telekinetic role of the pen seemed to be like the thing about PaperMate in 56 is 10, and ultimately it gets to like annotated, abortion, adoption, or when I think about even the Samsung refrigerator being alphanumeric of 94, and it seems to be like the Abraham Lincoln deal about the French drawer. Yet it seems to be like, why one pronoun of the four types of pronouns can be used as subject. It seems to be really about the rectangle of the hood ornament, which would really be representative, like even, the tennis court. Um, you know, uh, what quadrants really are in globalization, normally physical, spherical quadrants, okay, on like a worldwide map. Yet a quadrant that is ultimately getting to like a kernel. The Lincoln thing about the telekinetic role of the pen, and the Lincoln, and the telekin, and the thing about the veterinarian deal about the Corvette, and thing about um, the Chevrolet Corvette, and Chevrolet being like the alphanumeric 108 in business, and what all that is, in the categorization of money, all the way up to the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, or the separation between church and state, ultimately getting to the alphanumeric of 64 and an American, or like the movie thing about it, or Israel, and all that stuff about 64 and HTTP :/, and all the the real geniuses about the brain works, even symbolic representation that way. But it seemed to be that the Chevrolet Corvette is representative of what maybe only the RCA mascot of a dog might only be. Hey, like why one pronoun, the four types of pronouns can be used as a subject. I mean, is it like a dog pissing on a tree? Why one pronoun cannot be used as a subject, huh? I mean, is that like a dog pissing on a tree, or some patriotic thought of like Chevrolet Corvette beyond the veterinarian, or the Aryan Sky Angel Vatten and making a grade beyond the telekinetic roll of the pen, ultimately Lincoln Connell and the hood ornament, which would only be maybe the thought of maybe only a quadrant that would be representative of tennis court, whether it's a singles or doubles, and that marginal spread factor about what that is in global positioning systems, or the French door and the refrigerator, or the Samsung thing. It's kind of like I was mentioning, like Paul Newman, the color of money. Paul Newman also has that barbecue sauce, right? It's like all brown, like 72, and money, and the color money about that pool cue. And the thing about it is, it seemed to be like really, it's ultimately getting to like the cubic foot of the metric system and isometrics of like the Samsung refrigerator with the French doors, with the freezer on the bottom of it being like I think it's identified as like 28.2, but it's really 28.5. It's a difference of 6 and all the stuff about 6. And it's really 28.5, and like 56 is 10, like the telekinetic roll of the pen and PaperMate. 56 is 10. The pronunciation as the numerical of 10 being PaperMate, being paper, and mate like 39, being, the alphanumerics of the word itself 10, and the actual numerical value applied to it to be like 5610 is 94. The annotated thing of adoption, abortion, or whether the Roe v. Wade thing is really just an issue of like television programming, or the way it's spelt, of like a Roe being R-O-E or R-O-W-E, and with the W, the R-O-W-E being 61 in news, and what legal media and deposition is to like a odd team for real, okay? But the thing it is about the telekinetic roll of the pen normally is associated with like the thought of like a telepathic communication. And all the information is not all, I haven't seen it like not one time at the same time, on the same channel. I mean, I hadn't seen it on the same channel all, but it seems to be like ultimately the telekinetics doesn't even identify anything about Abraham Lincoln or the night vision thing about the only president that studied in the dark, or the Lincoln Continental, or the hood ornament, the rectangle in the way of wide world of sports is to like a 90 degree of a vertical rectangle. Ultimately, the deal about going to a Stargate program, and there was like really only 2 locations. One of Geneva, Switzerland, being a BN venue. And what the BN venue is to like human capital and human capital civil rights going through. Obviously, at this point, how could it not be about going through the circuit of like, aggregates and monetary domestic gross national product in a way of what a circuit really is anyway. Or the thought of like having the right to assemble in a way, or, what is being considered reserved or like not at all. In that way, or, what the telekinetic role is to only the thought of like a hood ornament, and innovation leading the way, the actually of a hood ornament, or, an easement of intellectual being used that way, because like, who wants to go through that, right? I mean, like it's like all that like happening right now. What was it like? Well, here's what I have to say about it. Okay, I mean, ultimately, if it's getting to the Abraham Lincoln thing about the spherical quadrant, or the quadrant, or the thought of a partition of a kernel, and Abraham Lincoln in the way of night vision, what programming is to whether if a kernel is only the thought of maybe a measurement of nanoluminance of like night vision, or whether if the pastel green or red is the only thing about the military, and the kernel involving, what a central processing unit is or is not, or some idea of solid state, or what the kernel really is in computer programming and language, that way of HTTP :/, and what Abraham Lincoln and night vision has to do with the hood ornament that way, or why proper English numerical composition normally doesn't even suggest Chevrolet Corvette as innovation leading the way, or the hood ornament, or the RCA mascot involving a veterinarian, okay? And it's ultimately getting to the part about going through a freaking circuit, okay? Or some like white collar executive and all that stuff about, some idea of like some dog pissing on a tree and some proper English numerical composition, some patriotic duty, right? So in any case, yeah, so like ultimately, be on a Chevrolet Corvette, and that Aryan and the Aryan Sky Angel Van being alphanumeric 213, or, telepathic brainwaves in Chevrolet Silverado and all that stuff about the geographic attachment to like Los Angeles and like Galveston County. But the thing about Galveston County being alphanumeric 213, I mean, ultimately, the Missouri country being the thing about the spirit of adoption, a biblical term, associated, with the thought of a telepathic birth in that way of telepathic communication geographically. I mean, as far as like religiously involved in Christianity, the phrase would, undoubtedly have to be the spirit of adoption that way. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to like what telepathic brainwaves is, I mean, Galveston County geographically couldn't just like put the R in it. It wouldn't equate, to, alphanumerics of 213, with Galveston County having the R and Galveston Country, or the thought of Missouri Country having the R and all that about the spirit of adoption having the alphanumerics of 206. As a spiritually valued geographic attachment to in God we trust thing about the symbolic representation on the backside of the U.S. $1 bill, or why the $1 doesn't weigh as much as a 10,000 Chase, 10,000 U.S. $10,000, or the T bill, the absentee voting thing that seemed to be like ultimately getting to whether or not if like the Chevrolet Corvette is only representative of what innovation leading the way is to like Abraham Lincoln, or what the Kernel is to the Kernel and Lincoln, or what that is to the veterinarian in the Chevrolet Corvette, or beyond the executive classroom of the expenditures of going through the thought of like aggregates in a way of like monetary domestic gross national product, or what reserve is or is not in the way, or having a right to assemble in the way representative of whether or not that is exponential quotients of powers of multiplication as compared to the pi r squared, where placement in exponents would be only a pi r squared would only be representative of whether exponents are only of addition or subtraction, and what that is to alphanumerics that way, or beyond the executive classroom, and of expenditures, that seem to be the thought of more so of like the placement of like what would be involved degree level of beyond the executive classroom, of exponential quotients being the actual degree itself of the academics beyond the thought of a telekinetic roll of the pen, or PaperMate being the alphanumerics of 56 to 10, which is the analytical reasoning of actually placing and using two numbers for alphanumeric and linguistics and practical application of integration and compatibility of like beyond and involving alphanumerics and linguistics, that when the alphabet's reversed, M is in, N is in, 13 is 14, 14 is 13, and that being like the alphanumerics of 55 and like heaven and then the sky thing. Well, the thing about Aryan, sky, and Sylvatin being alphanumerics is 213, the thought of like beyond the Corvette and the like the veterinarians thing about the Corvette, okay, or core curriculum in a way of what literal equity might only suggest as a you've probably heard it before. See, you wouldn't want to be. Or why is that? Is someone like doing it all for you, right? Is that really what the idea of like intellectual claim is, or is it just supposed to sound like a North American Free Trade Act? Like it's just like it's really not a dead giveaway, but what's that in your wallet and involving like thou shalt not bear a graven image? Is that a U.S. dollar, or retroactive presidential administration claiming that there's been like an eternal factor of like eternal life or eternal damnation attached to like biblical prophecy and hadn't made the grade beyond, the executive classroom, okay? So anyway, like it gets to like, the HTTP : // and whether the double forward slash is really 22.5 degrees, and what 22 is to the FDIC and RCA, and the alphanumerics between like FBI psychology minus 22, or what 22 is to the Japanese alphabet, only information that I know of, that there's 22 alphabetical letters in the Japanese alphabet, and how true that is, truthfully, but that is the information, okay? And ultimately it gets to like the thought of like reading Japanese from top to bottom and the vertical thing of like Diners Club and the symbolic representation, and what a 90 degree is to like the blue circle with the blue line in the middle at a 90 degree would present the quadrants. And normally it's always whether it's symmetrical, asymmetrical, or the thought of an equator or an operator that way, somewhere between the thought of like quantum, and quantum is normally the thought of one maybe two structures of like the Japanese alphabet itself, and the structure itself of using the different by design E in quantum of the absolute values normally associated with the algorithm, going beyond calculus and involving attenuation and special effects of like waveform, as compared to what I see as the limitation of 13-band graphic equalizer. Normally, some people's thought might be maybe the solid state thing, a practical application of like bandwidth and spectrum, only speeding up and slowing down, oscillation of like chosen spectrum and bandwidth of frequencies, changing the pitch and tone, what a 13 graphic band equalizer does, but yet at the same time, potentiometer in a way of what would normally represent maybe even, like the bar, the thought of like a solid state thing that might represent maybe a spectrum in a way of a potentiometer, normally in a circular form of a dial. A potentiometer gives the same practical application of bandwidth and spectrum, that way of changing the value. And with like the 13 band graphic equalizer, it's only speeding up and slowing down oscillation of chosen spectrum and bandwidth of frequency, as compared to like the potentiometer sometimes involving amplification in a whole different manner, not a set regulated but a variable of like increased power, as compared to like if you want to call it the barcode or the solid state thing between the circle. And the way I see IBM, it's like it represents the input output of the alphanumerics of the acronym itself, being like the I, being like the bar or the solid state thing, and the BM being 15, or the O or the 0, or the input output thing about the potentiometer that way, and the power up thing, even the symbolic representation of like the Diners Club thing. And ultimately it gets to telekinetic roll of the pen and all this information, the thought beyond the categorization of money and in God we trust, or the CEO dog thing, about the thing about the veterinarian, the Corvette, okay, or the telekinetic roll of the pen. Ultimately, it's getting to the Abraham Lincoln thing about the hood ornament, and what is seemed to be normally the thought of like the pi r squared factor of like even a tennis court, whether it's a singles or doubles, seeming to be the marginal spread on either side. Is like the issue that seems to reflect the quadrant of the rectangle that would represent maybe why one pronoun of the four types of pronoun that cannot be used as a subject. And it's ultimately getting to once again the kernel. And I put a real slowdown on thinking about it, because it sometimes gives the impression that the kernel is just involving a partition, but is that always true in a way of only? I mean, is it just the thought of like a if it's innovation leading the way? I mean, is the partition in a way representing an architecture platform embedding in encryption in the way of a kernel, or whether the R is in the kennel or the kernel, or what that is to the Chevrolet Corvette and In God We Trust, or the RCA mascot. I mean, for real, what innovation leading the way only means to a mascot and a hood ornament, that way of like the Radio Corporation of America, okay, going through a circuit, okay. And it seems to be like, the telekinetic roll of the pen, the thought of like a mental telepathy minus God, okay? Or the 26 thing, the God, the dog, lie, game, card, the 26 thing, okay? And what Z is to Z71 in Paraline of Chevrolet Silverado, or in telepathic brainwave, Z71, and what the Z26 is to, all that stuff about it, okay? 26 being God, game, card, lie, dog, and all that 26 stuff, okay? Ultimately get into like the Chevrolet Corvette, and what the vet is to the veterinarian, or Aryan Sky Angel that, and then the telekinetic roll of the pen beyond, the thought of like the executive classroom of PaperMate, okay? Or the double, the vertical hearts on the pen itself, and what the heart is to being plural, being the two thing about the hearts being, heart being 52, or pearl, or the thing about, what here recently, and I thought about it before, about the Wells Fargo like stagecoach, and it seems to be so much about the Wyatt Earp, and the Earp being the exclusionary rule provision, or, what that is to the Lord's Supper, and the stagecoach representative, even John Wayne, in the way of like what hopsing is, and what a stagecoach is to like, even hopsing on a toilet in a way, of like leading, innovation leading the way. And what Diners Club is to like cop saying, or the jaywalker, the amphibious thing about J. Edgar Hoover, or the thought of like being amphibious and not like jaywalking at all, but amphibious in a way of like what levitation would only represent, and some biblical reference of like even like Leviticus and just the book of Levi and all that stuff about 501 blues and the genes thing, right? But anyway, I wanted to include that because I was thinking about that because it's like really really not humorous to me about something about that involving what Abraham Lincoln seemed to be of only night vision. It seemed to be the thing whether or not if the whole thought and idea would only be representative of just a duration that seemed to be like going on and on and on, or a patent pending in a way of some like spiritually gifted communication, you know tolerance and all that stuff about discipline and who's trying to kid who at this point about a patent pending, huh? A kernel, huh? I mean, does that normally involve like what would give the impression of color code in a way of what only implementation would mean in political science? Is ultimately getting to whether or not that the nativity point of origin of a telepathic CP would represent some civilized issues, beyond the classroom, or some idea like of whether a reserve or reverse is only the thought of a preservation, or even the thought of like the thing about it seemed to be like the writ of habeas corpus seems to be like something on my mind about involving Mercedes Benz, and what's normally associated with like the Deep Star Six thing involving like Deep Star Six as compared to like the Israeli flag, the code blue thing, and what all that code blue is to like the flag itself and the blue and purple bird, okay, of Israel being the alphanumerics of like 128 blue and purple, and the whoopa thing about the bird, and the thought of Zion and that way of the alphanumerics of the 1,000 years of peace, and what that is to like FM 1128 and geographically and all that stuff between the terabyte and 1,024 gigabytes, and minus 1128 being the difference of 104 electronic annuity and taxation that way, which is predominantly like the thought of like Mercedes Benz and the three thing, and the big three, what that is to even the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or the thought of that why one pronoun cannot be used as a subject. Is it because it hadn't experienced the circuit of Abraham Lincoln night vision between distinguishing the similarities of like the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit based upon the practical application of a Stargate program? Okay, I mean if that's really the only idea of like the three axes intersecting axes of Audi, or the 3-pointer Mercedes Benz, or even the thought of like a why a writ of habeas corpus seems to be given the three factors of why maybe litigation is not necessarily de facto, or the thought of settlement in the way of only whether if a burning state of Texas statutes annotated only reflects a degreed or non-degreed issue, or what's the North American Free Trade Act in a way of like a daily standard transaction to the bank as non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization. I mean, is it really only based upon the history of a mailbox and whether it's a direct deposit or not? I mean, it's still a checking account. And obviously, that seems to be obviously the issue, whether or not if it's going to be, whether or not if an endorsement is ever going to, stop being the history of a mailbox or a rural route, or what that is to like even Wells Fargo and the Stagecoach and Wyatt Earp and John Wayne thing about the writ of habeas corpus and all that true grit stuff it's ultimately getting to, whether or not if a writ of habeas corpus only represents something that seemed to be the suspending thing that George Bush, it seemed like the transition between William Jefferson Clinton and George Bush seemed to be like when I actually realized something I'd normally seen like on products of food, the additives, preservatives, and byproducts. And I didn't even realize it for like several years when I started thinking about it. But I noticed I wasn't seeing that like on like food was the additives, preservatives, and byproducts. Yet it seems to be like something that was like actually really happening. That normally is kind of like when I was like young, it's kind of like why is that even on there? Additives, preservatives, and byproducts. And it wasn't like even like really noticeable in the way of like what's all that about. But when I noticed I didn't see it, I mean I didn't notice it, and how long I realized maybe how long had I not noticed it. It really ultimately got to the transition between the William Jefferson Clinton and Al Gore administration. Ultimately, my thing about the presidential inaugural ball, including Chevy Chase of like 1992, and the transition into George Bush, and ultimately it gets to that period of time. It seemed to be ultimately seemingly be the thing about Abraham Lincoln night vision, And, you know, I'd realized something about the additives, reserves, and byproducts seem to be like during that transition, um, right there between, you know, William Jefferson Clinton and the George W. Bush thing about it. And whether if the W in George W. Bush represents, you know, Philadelphia in the way of like Fox 29 News, or like the Benjamin Franklin, the idea of like the key, or the 247 degree of like Southwestern Bell, and ultimately the colors of AT&T in the 1040EZ form, and involving the same colors of the 1040EZ and the Air Force One, the President of the United States jet, or some intellectual duration that actually reflects the thought of like midnight blue, and the actual going through like a Stargate program involving the colors of like midnight blue, and like all that, you know, sovereign immunity and governmental amnesty thing about Wyatt Earp, and all that stuff about, you know, the Stargate program. And like, you know, I'm sure it's maybe not limited to, but since Houston, Texas is Electronic Power and We International, and what Harris is the Alphanurics of 73 in Union and Egypt, and all that, you know, triangular pyramid thing about the Delta Force and the pi r squared of a 3-point triangle, getting to the thought of like, you know, why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronoun kind of be used as a subject. I mean, because like, you know, a pyramid really has 4 sides to begin with, but yet in schematics, it only looks like a triangle. Yet, you know, pi r squared in the web, like even the 6-point star being 6-point star being Alphaner's 138, or a telepathic angel. You know, it seems to be the thing right now of like either whether Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and it seemed to be the alphanumerics of 138, and the similarities of, you know, what all that is. It seems to be like whether or not if the thought of like Highway 288 is ultimately representing some alphanumeric connectivity between the two in that way. But in any case, yeah, so like I was thinking about that because the thing in my mind, somehow the root of habeas corpus seems to present in my mind somehow the thought of dimensional clause or innovation leading the way, or Abraham Lincoln, and the rectangle being like maybe a quadrant, and what that quadrant is to like a kernel or a central processing unit, or what solid state is in that way, and involving the tennis court, and the thought of like the 90 degree of the rectangle ultimately being the big deal, like going through a Stargate program of like the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, identifying, you know, 2 locations of like only, if you know, I wouldn't even call it love, but to say what it is like remembering what I've seen and haven't seen and became aware of. Yet the information is available, and the accusation that like, you know, hey, you know, and the thought of like the being venue in Geneva, Switzerland, normally associated with the summit meetings. Um, Direct, immediate like thought about the connectivity between like what human capitalist to human investment and human civil rights is. The thought of like whether or not if that would only be the thought of like prepaid postage going through a circuit, um, or maybe the thought of maybe knowing or not knowing whether if a claim of intellectual value as what a royalty, or is that like still like a patent pending thought of like the telekinetic roll of the pen, and what you know it all sounds like after, you know, the executive classroom. So, you know, it's kind of like thinking about that with the Chevrolet Corvette thing about, you know, what the thought is with all that, and Abraham Lincoln and all that information about it. And I just thought I'd have that to say. It's already going on like 38 minutes and like 30 seconds right now. So anyway, yeah, I want to include that real quick, and there it is. All right, talk to you later.